Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Payments Leader Show. And today, absolutely delighted to be having a fireside chat with Derren Powell from Mastercard. On the show, we want to know and for leaders to share how they lead their people and how they create a winning culture that is human-centered. And how they obviously embrace the opportunities that are vast within the payment space. Now, one of the greatest challenges we've observed, or I've observed particularly, is how to identify and build relationships that enable people to reach their potential whilst obviously realizing the growth targets of the organization. One of the most accomplished people I've seen this at firsthand is Derren. So he is the VP of FinTech Partnerships at Mastercard for UK and Ireland. And he leads with ensuring they are doing good by doing well. He's not only one of the most commercially minded professionals I know, he's also one of the most curious and one of the most decent human beings I know. He's always looking to connect with others to create mutual ongoing benefit, and is a stellar relationship builder and, as I say, thoroughly decent human being. So welcome on the show.
Thanks a lot, Adrian. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Thanks for taking the time out. Much appreciated. Always love our conversations.
Yeah, so likewise.
Brilliant. So I wonder if we could dive straight in. And I wonder if you could describe some of the choices that you've made in your career within the payments industry.
So I think it's important to acknowledge that, my career doesn't just span and hasn't just focused on payments, right? I mean, 24 plus years have been spent very much in banking, retail and right across the piece. But of course, there's some synergy and transferable skills, hopefully a lot of them, into payments. But I guess in terms of choices, mine sort of starts and ends with people, to be honest. My overriding choice, and someone who was instrumental and a personal friend and solid mentor, was ultimately when I was in a period of flux in terms of where do I go next. So I had been working in the Middle East. For very specific and personal reasons, I returned to the UK, didn't want to really go back into the banking world. And this individual, like I said, very good friend, mentor, and good counsel, basically said to me, so what about this? What about payments? This wonderful world of, at the time, prepaid.
Yeah.
And being honest, that choice and that conversation was based purely around people. And by that, I mean people I trust, people I listen to, people who display genuine sincerity, empathy, humility, and good counsel, and ultimately leadership. And I listened to that person, and that person helped open doors. And similarly, I'm a big believer in, and it sounds a little cliche, but good people recommend and introduce good people to good people. And I think it's far easier in life to be the person you want to be naturally and person you can be naturally versus being someone who you think one should be.
Sure.
So I guess my answers are very, very simple, and it starts and ends with the people that you engage and the people that you associate yourself with within your own network.
Brilliant. Well, that's a wonderful segue to my next question, which is, I know how committed you are to a partnership approach, and that's a very people-led approach, I know. And you obviously take a strong way and route to building trusted partnerships and relationships with people. I wonder if we could just dig into that a little bit more, and perhaps you can tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think first of all, the important thing with partnership for me is that it's mutually beneficial.
Sure.
There needs to be value both sides, and I think there needs to be a clear intent and purpose that is perhaps not necessarily defined up front, but becomes relatively clear pretty quickly, within that engagement. I mean, let's be honest, that there are many partnerships, and I think for me it's the beauty of partnerships. I would never ever rebuff the opportunity to have a conversation. I think that there's that. If you don't know what you could have won, right? And similarly, why wouldn't you have a conversation? It could be the most enlightening or enriching experience. That might be personally as well as on a business level. And I think that's important to acknowledge too. You know, I think out of partnerships, yeah, great things may happen in business, but actually, as a result of that partnered approach, great things can happen for that partnership, whether that's on a business level, personally, the wider network and the impacts of that. But I guess I'm always looking for, when I'm entering into partnership or partner-led conversations, who else could benefit? Who else could be brought into that collaboration? And certainly on a personal perspective, as well as, you know, the company that I work with and for, that collaborative, inclusive approach for me is always at the core.
Okay. It's fascinating, I suppose, in the world you and I operate, that's sort of normal. We wake up every day, you know, I think we're actually quite similar in many ways. We wake up every day, I suppose that's where we get on so well, but we wake every day just sort of thinking, actually, if I could do this for them and that could be good over here. And it's sort of, and it's an easy to do. If somebody asked me a favor the other day, would I give a referral? And I said, well, why don't you send me something and I'll send it to all of my network, not just give you a referral.
Yeah.
And she was like, oh my God, I can't believe you did that. But it's not that. For me, it's like, so can we take a step back? Because this is not normal, right? This is not, most people I know, okay, or most people in the world will go, okay, why would I be vulnerable and step out and build a relationship? I might get rejected. I might, why have I got to go first? Why can't somebody? And that is the prevailing, not just in the UK, but I think in many other places. So I'm fascinated. I'm really curious about where that's, and I know Mastercard leads with that, but where's that come for you personally?
I mean, I think personally, that's within my, that's my DNA. That's my fabric, right? I mean, everyone, you can wax lyrical about one's upbringing or my family, but ultimately, I believe that is instilled in me, and that's my moral compass. You know, my value set. You know, I think it's. I'm very happy. This might sound a bit odd, but I'm very happy to get rejected. I'm good with that, you know, but I'd like to think that it's how one defines rejection. You know, for me, I'd like to think there's enough of a story and enough of an ability on an interpersonal level to engage relatively quickly and to be able to find some common ground. I also think there's an inherent desire on my part personally to ultimately to please, right? To please myself and to please others. And as a result of that, well, if I take that a little further, I sort of alluded to it in my introduction. I think it's just far easier to be nice and far easier to be kind and far easier just to do things with a smile rather than actually doing things under sufferance. I want to blaze trails. I want to demonstrate what good looks like. I want to be seen as someone who both my network, whether that's friends, family, colleagues, or wider network who don't know me, I want to be seen as a go-to. I want to be seen as someone who can help, who will enable, who will connect people. And I guess as a result of that, if you put all that together, ultimately, if I can achieve that, it makes my job and my delivery also far easier. So why wouldn't I do that? As well as the fact that I actually love doing it and I'm really passionate about making that happen, those things happen.
Brilliant. I love the way you said that. Actually, to sort of, it's the very fabric of you. And what I love is it just shows you're in the right job. Yep. Because of what you love doing and how you passionately connect people. So you can say something.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I mean, another mentor of mine who's been very kind to me in my career also talks a lot about edge. What's your edge? And I think for me, I'm able to hopefully demonstrate and showcase my edge in this exact topic. Because like you say, it's not normal. Well, that's good, because I don't necessarily like to be normal anyway.
I know
obviously there's some things where, of course, I will conform and I want to conform at the right time. But ultimately, it's to blaze those trails, if that's not too strong a term, but to push into new spaces and ultimately do what the vertical that I work within, i.e. fintech, does. You've got to push boundaries. You've got to challenge. And therefore, for me, that sinks in very nicely with my remit and role.
Nice. Again, you're segueing here beautifully into the questions I've got, which, obviously you're in that really exciting space of fintech, and you do seem to know everybody in the fintech space. Whenever I've been at a payments association event, or just online, but you once described that marketplace as like having to bet on all of the horses of the Grand National to make sure you. Where did you get the confidence from? I love the saying and I love the sentiment. Where did you get the confidence from to have that perspective?
I come back to that R word, rejection. You learn a lot from rejection, or rejection's maybe too strong word, but challenge. When people perhaps question or challenge one's approach, and I think as a result of that, there's an inherent confidence that gets built, because you get equipped really quickly with some answers that you didn't have before. It's a bit like the classic. You've got to. If you're going to make a mistake, make it fast, learn from it, build on it. But I think for me, it's also about having the confidence to say, we will make some bets that will not come off. That's okay. It's okay. In fact, it's wholly reflective of the industry. Some will scale at real pace and be the next unicorns before you know it. Some will, they will, in the nicest sense, I mean it respectfully, they'll bumble along. And they may or may not get bought, or they may sort of merge into other things, or they may pivot, and that's great. And there'll be others that fail. Again, you've got to be in it to be a part of it. And you've got to be to be a part of that ecosystem. You've got to demonstrate your value and worth. And I guess from my perspective, whether it's working here at Mastercard or in other previous roles, it's about being confident enough to and honest enough to demonstrate the value that you bring at that time, and the value that you could bring tomorrow versus today, and just today, and really then start to, have the confidence to put your hat into the ring on all of those opportunities. The bigger challenge for me, of course, is one of bandwidth and capacity.
Absolutely.
Yeah. LinkedIn can tell a wonderful story. I can make my life look wonderful on LinkedIn. Behind the scenes, you're tired. There's a few tears in one's eyes. And you're glad it's the weekend, etc., etc. But LinkedIn and the power of social selling, it's a machine, and there's also a huge amount that you can achieve and get through. As a business development leader, if you like, there's a huge amount of growth and opportunity that can be sourced from such channels.
Brilliant. Yeah, I love the way you passionately always bring that to any conversation. So I'm so pleased to have you on today. And talking about the opportunities, because you say, what excites you most about, frankly, the plethora of opportunities that are coming? I loved it today, even on LinkedIn. I liked a post you put up about the cost of living response. And about the value of buy now, pay later compared to traditional credit cards, etc. It's and again, I feel really proud, and I know you do, to be part of an industry that can actually deal with some of the challenges that normal people are facing right here, right now. But what excites you most in this industry right now, in the payments industry?
I think there's a couple of things. I think the first is the role of technology and the impact that technology can have on innovation and accelerating change. Let's use, and it's a terrible thing to have happened, right? The pandemic, COVID.
Yeah.
But if you look at whether you look at adoption or you look at the acceleration of change, the drive to digital during that time, it has been nothing short of phenomenal.
Yeah.
When you look at some of the explosion of some of the technology companies that have been very clear on their purpose and their mission, and perhaps the consumer base or commercial base that they serve, we've seen a real proliferation of those sorts of entities. So for me, that technology as an enabler, and therefore the role that I do, and the very small part that will play in driving positive change and impact, that to me is tremendously exciting and a genuine privilege to be able to be a part of that, however small that part may be. I think, some of the other things to perhaps think about are, for me, fintech is becoming ever more niche in terms of the use cases or the challenges that some of these technology companies are looking to solve. That's fascinating. I mean, if you look at some of the, obviously my sweet spot within the card issuance space. But if you look at some of the propositions that have come out and who and whom they are targeting and what they're trying to solve, I mean, it's phenomenal. So that can't help make you feel good. Look at our planet, the impacts of impact, purpose, sustainability, carbon offsetting in a world way beyond just, and I say just, again, I mean this respectfully, but just planting a tree. But when that becomes intrinsic to the DNA of an organization, where you really are trying to use Mastercard's mantra as an example, to do well by doing good, I mean, that's a phenomenal opportunity. The acceleration of change, the ability for these fintechs to pivot at real pace. They're not oil tankers. They can turn around so quickly and change their direction of travel. That's phenomenal, and it's fascinating to be a part of.
Yeah. Brilliant. You touched on it there, but I know I know you have many passions, but I know one of your big passions is diversity and inclusion. Yeah, and I know you touched on some of those areas there, but I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about why that means so much to you.
I mean, it's really simple for me. I mean, I look at my role as a father, but also, again, at my upbringing, but, more importantly, as a dad, I want my children to grow up in a world where they wholly embrace an inclusive and wholly inclusive approach right across the diversity, equity, and inclusion, spectrum. For me, it should just be. I don't understand. Obviously, I do, but for me, it shouldn't have to be called out as often as it does right now. It's the norm. It should be the norm. I genuinely think that there's an educational part we can all play within society. I think we're very lucky where we live, and I think we're very lucky with what the situation therefore that surrounds us. But when we go to different parts of the world, and thankfully travel is very much rebounding, and we're seeing more than just green shoots now. But you travel to some areas of the world where and you see things which are very hard to walk past, some of which of course you cannot walk past, but others it's inherent within culture perhaps, where it's actually more disrespectful to perhaps put one size 13s in the wrong place. But I think for me that acceptance absolutely matters. Inclusion by default is that word. It is inclusive, not exclusive. And I think as a result of an inclusive approach and that's so multifaceted, and yes, there's some cross sectionality across that DEI piece, but ultimately by having an inclusive approach, you get the very best in breed of ideas, of people, of creativity. The oxygen that we're all sharing is truly going for and to the greater good.
Yeah, wonderful. Yes, a number of years ago, I went to see Matthew Syed. It was his book launch pre-pandemic, and it's called Rebel Ideas, but it's about the power of cognitive diversity.
Yeah.
And he gave some extraordinary examples of narrow-minded, lack of diversity and why that happened, that fixed mindset and a narrow mindset. But to me, I'm like you. It's almost a given. If we get a room full of people who are all from similar backgrounds, both demographically and cognitively, we're going to get similar results. But I just see, I think it's many years ago, listening to, I think it was Ajay from, obviously, former CEO of Mastercard, and I think he was referring to a situation in Africa. I think it might have been in Nigeria, and they come up with this idea. I don't recall it completely, but there's an idea where that would solve something in that particular market. And somebody in purchase said, I would never come up with that idea. That doesn't happen in New York. We need to understand and serve our customer needs. That's local market knowledge, even on a very simple example. But if we're to try to solve that problem only from New York, well, it would have failed dismally. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But this is also where, we're seeing a greater importance, where we're starting to see, and we have, a group inclusion and diversity officer,
Sure.
absolutely critical to decisions. Similarly, I don't think it's right to necessarily focus on any one part of that DEI lens.
Agree.
But similarly, let's also acknowledge it's a bit like where we're saying for us it's perhaps the norm. Yeah, maybe, but we know that's not reflective of wider society, right? But I think, it's important to do all that we can to work in whether it's gender or faith,
Sure.
LGBTQ plus, neurodiversity, to name a couple. I mean, we've got to be doing all we can to positively impact and accelerate acceptance across that whole piece. And that for me is the challenge, and it's genuinely only going to be borne out with under true leadership, and people who are brave enough to challenge and put one's head above the parapet.
Now, we talked about it, as you say, it's interesting what you're saying about niche, and we talked about the impactful negotiation for women course that we have that is aimed directly at reducing the gender pay gap, and that's just one element there. But I just think it's, as you say, it feels like a real privilege to be able to make that impact and actually see the difference that makes, even on a short course like that, what people are able to do. And look, I think we both get a bit of a kick for people being able to do things they never were able to do before an interaction. And probably coming back to your key point is like, if you don't have that interaction, you don't know what you're going to miss out on. You simply don't know, do you?
No, exactly. But that's where I think it's, it's a wonderful place to be, where you're able to realize or help others realize some of those light bulb moments.
Yeah.
So what is unbelievably simple to one person is unbelievably life-changing for others potentially. And being able to realize that and being able to sort of make, albeit again, be the enabler of change and making some of those things happen, it is a privilege.
Well, I do have a saying, which is like, we all wake up every single day with things that are really useful for everybody else, but we take for granted because, we do them every day. And, it's the old cobbler's shoes things, isn't it? So, but I do think recognizing that, and also just having that mindset like you do of just saying, well, okay, well, if we're looking for 5 wins or 4 wins most days, we're probably doing that a bit more than actually looking within here. So, you mentioned right at the beginning of the show some of the mentors that have had an impact on your career. Who has been most influential in you becoming an authentic leader that you are today?
I think I'll come back to one of my earlier responses, which is there's been numerous people who I've been extremely lucky to work with and have come across in my working life, a number of which one wouldn't appreciate being called out.
Okay, sure.
But two, you come across people in your life at times who are going to be one, going to become friends, and two, are going to become part of your own personal network as well as wider network. But I guess for me, it's about being able to take from the various people, and I could easily count them on 2 hands, that have genuinely made a significant impact to whether it's my thinking, my thought leadership, my style, etc., etc. But I've tried to take what I see and what I deem as the best pieces from each of those individuals, which allows me to hopefully become better as an individual, better as a partner, define partner as you wish, but also better as a leader. Because I think there's a real difference between a manager and a leader. And I don't seek to be a manager. I do aspire to be a cracking leader.
Sure. Sure.
That hasn't answered your question directly, I appreciate. But it's mainly for me about being able to understand and acknowledge when I'm in the presence of someone or something rather special, and being able to assimilate out and define what is that what I believe that the secret sauce, and how can I then use that secret sauce? And I may add a few different flavors and spices to that sauce and create my own, but I'll try and make it a bit better.
Brilliant. No, I love that, because as you say, it's great that actually it's more the sort of methodology and mindset you brought to there, and actually, as you say, almost sort of thin sliced in some of those best bits from those people. But actually, you just described it. It is like making a cake, yeah, or a recipe, and actually adding those bits of authenticity. But again, you have to stay authentically you, and I know that's one of the things I really admire about you. You show up as authentically you. So I'm getting the sense there that look, it's good to take possibly some elements from some people, but at the same time, then what you're not looking to do is actually become all of that individual.
No.
Because the key piece is you need to show up authentically as you.
Absolutely. I mean, look, we've known each other a little while now, but you make me think, and you make me reflect, and you make me challenge myself in a very different way than what I've had in other areas of my life. Right.
Thank you.
So again, that our engagement and our relationship, as a mentor, as well as a coach, and as well as many other things that you bring to that party. I mean, that's a prime example of what you've just said there, being able to reflect and genuinely reflect, not just say one's doing that, but then try and understand how into my style or flair or whatever it may be, how do I then deploy that? Because if I try and become Adrian with what Adrian's just told me and coached me and schooled me in something very specific, unless I become that and I live and breathe that, it's quite honest. It's not going to work for me nor the people around me.
Sure. It's interesting. Thank you for the feedback. But it's interesting for me because my question is always, I've got multiple formulas, 7 pointers, 14 pointers, whatever. My challenge is always how can I get down to weave this into his world? First of all, what's his world? What's his world? What's the context that this is even going to land on? Because we know, the worst thing to ever take is advice, because you need to be ready for it. And you need to usually ask for it. Let's have a look. We're both fathers, for God's sake. If advice, it kills me every time when one of my friends will say exactly the same to one of my kids as I've said 3 weeks ago. And he said, "Oh, you wouldn't believe what John said the other day." And you're like, "Oh." So, advice, it needs to be weaved in authentically. And again, I think also.
But for me, it's also about how has the advice been solicited? And similarly, how is the advice being given? If I change the word advice for feedback, I'll lap that up all day long.
Yeah.
If someone gives me advice that I'm not necessarily looking for at that time,
of course,
that's a little bit more tricky.
Of course.
But feedback, again, it comes down to that being humble enough to listen, vulnerable enough to listen, and actually curious enough perhaps to understand how could I be better off and be better off for taking on board the feedback that I'm giving. I might not always agree with the feedback. Don't get me wrong. I might not always agree with it, but I'll listen.
Sure.
And I will truly think about, could I use that feedback positively for my personal brand?
Yeah. Brilliant. I love that growth mindset of yours. The fact that you think, okay, wherever it's coming from, I'm going to at least absorb this because it could be something really useful here. Because so many people, the first thing they do is get sort of a bit defensive when the feedback. But I know myself, the biggest growth opportunities I've had in my career, and I've had the privilege to work for and with and be mentored by some incredible people, which I'm forever grateful for, is actually some of those times when they've gone, actually, you're way off here. You need to be. And again, the first time these days, I've always, I get a night's sleep on it. That's my one. Like, if that feedback really is grating, I'm going to stick a night's sleep in it. The following morning, I'm thinking, actually, do you know what? There's something in there. So it can be really useful. So having a bit of a reflective there, what do you wish you knew earlier on in your career? This is your famous age 21 question. What do you wish you knew then that you now know today?
I guess the overarching one is, it's absolutely fine. And this sounds a bit cliche, it's not meant to, but number one, you've got to be able to make mistakes, and you've got to have the confidence to make a mistake. Or you've got to have the confidence to perhaps turn left when maybe you should have turned right. But hindsight's a wonderful thing, and hindsight will always be there. So that's my first. I think the second is, from that experience, take the learning and take the learning quickly, and understand what you're going to do differently next time around, should a similar opportunity or not present itself. I think the biggest one for me is the power of partnership and the power of the network. I'd like to think there's a pretty strong network that I have, both personally and professionally, in place today. But that's taken a long time, and probably longer than what it needed to take in terms of developing. I think there's a number of strategies and tactics that I could have done far quicker, and therefore put myself out far sooner. Now, that might not have worked as well back then, because as a young buck, you do need to take time, and I think organic growth is a good thing. And patience is always something that I have in short supply, but it's something that I've started to respect and value far more. But I do think, the network and what a network can provide on many, many levels is unbelievably powerful. So for me, it would be never underestimating the power of that and those around you.
Okay. Well, Derren, thank you very much for sharing these insights with us. What I normally do now is just give my sort of takeaways. There's been many, so I'm gonna have to try and narrow some of these down. But I'm gonna have to listen back to this again, because I think that there have been so many. But before I do that, is there anything else you'd like to add that you think would be some really good closing remarks for our audience at all?
I think my one parting shot would just be leadership versus management. And similarly, the whole ethos of coaching versus a tell mentality. For me, that's something to some very, very subtle differences, albeit with significant consequence and differential in performance post. Okay,
brilliant. They've caused me even more of a problem now, because I had it down to about 4 or 5, and now I'm back up to 8 insights. So I just wanted to pull this down. Just some of the most prominent takeaways for me is, I think, first of all, number one for me was, it's okay to make mistakes. And I think it's what you do with those mistakes and how you reframe those mistakes and rejection that's going to enable what's the other side of that. That came across strongly. I think the other piece then about the value of partnership and network is it can't be overstated. And I know for you, as one's job is to network and business development on a consistent basis. But interesting that point 3 for me is like, that's driven by almost an insatiable level of curiosity. And actually, I suppose my question to the audience is, by not reaching out and by being curious, what's the opportunity cost of not reaching out to somebody and going, oh, that's a little itch there. I'm just going to reach out to that person and have that conversation. So where could you do that? I think the sort of final piece for me, I think, which is really stood out importantly, which is, diversity and inclusion, isn't just a nice thing to have. It's a necessity as human beings. It's a necessity as parents and custodians moving around the world. But also, though, it makes damn good commercial sense. So having a diverse group of people solving a problem, you're probably on average, we're not trying to run 400 meters or 4 times 100 meters where we just need 4 fast people, assuming they can get a baton around. Our problems are sticky, they're complex. And so therefore, it's actually, to go back to a Mastercard statement, which is, doing well by doing good, actually, that's 4 wins. We can get 4 wins out of that situation. So I can't thank you enough for today. I can see you coming back on the show. I'd love to have you back on the show. And thank you very much indeed. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow evening as well, and raising the glass as well. But I can't thank you enough for your insight, your wisdom, and of course, your curiosity as ever.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks, Adrian.
My pleasure. Take care. Look after yourself.
Thanks. Bye-bye.